Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowney with Campbellsville University. Today we're continuing in our series of interviews with candidates for statewide constitutional offices in the May 21st primary. And today we're very pleased to be hosting Daniel Cameron, Republican candidate for Kentucky Attorney General. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Chowney.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Elizabethtown.
Not far away.
Not far at all. In fact, my mom and I get over here to Green River Lake pretty often during the summers. But grew up there. Parents owned a small business, coffee shop, Zach's Coffee. Worked in the shop in the summers and some during the school year as well. But I spent most of my time on the football field and played at John Hardin High School. Graduated from there. And then went on to the University of Louisville to play a little bit of football there as well. I tell people played's probably too generous of a term. I spent a lot of time on the bench rooting for folks that were much more talented than I was, but it was a good experience nonetheless. We won the Liberty Bowl, went to the Gator Bowl, and then at that point, what was the pinnacle of the program, we went and won the Orange Bowl. So had a great experience there. I was also a McConnell Scholar in undergrad. That's actually how I got to meet Senator McConnell very early on. That was a terrific experience as well. Learned a lot about government and democracy, and so did that over the course of 4 years, and then graduated and actually stayed at the University of Louisville for law school. Graduated from Brandeis, and then went and clerked for a gentleman over in the Eastern District of Kentucky, Judge Greg Van Tatenhove. Did that for 2 years over in London. We actually lived in Lexington, but we'd commute to London. That was sort of a part of the job. So we did that, really enjoyed that experience and learned a lot from him about how to interpret the Constitution, which in my judgment, it's the Constitution, not only the Constitution, but statutes as well, sort of a strict interpretation of what those documents say. And so concluded that, and then went back to Louisville, worked at a law firm, and then in November of 2014 got a call from Senator McConnell asking me to be his general counsel in Washington, D.C. So that relationship extends back to, like I said, when I was in undergrad. And he knew a little bit about my political leanings, and he enjoys Louisville football, so we bonded over those two things. And I prayed about it and consulted the judgment of a few folks who I really trust their opinion, and ultimately made the decision to go up. I went up in the February of 2015 and had an amazing 2.5 years up there.
And now you're in practice.
I am. I'm back here in practice full time at Frost Brown Todd in Louisville. I came back in June of 2017.
Now, why did you choose to become a candidate for Attorney General at this point in time?
Yes, sir. Well, most of my time in Senator McConnell's office, two of the things that I was responsible for, as his general counsel, I obviously had the legal and compliance issues that I handled, but I also had a legislative portfolio. So I worked with him very closely on judicial nominations. I helped him get Neil Gorsuch confirmed to the United States Supreme Court, which I was proud of. But what I was most proud of was the relationships and the opportunity that I had to work with Kentucky law enforcement. I was the liaison in the office for Kentucky law enforcement. So I worked closely with the leadership of the Kentucky Narcotics Officers Association, the Warren County Drug Task Force, the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, the FBI, the DEA, our state and federal prosecutors, all of these groups within the law enforcement community that have been trying to get a handle on the drug epidemic. And so I learned intimately on a day in, day out basis the challenges that they have to confront as it relates to the drug epidemic. And so as I was moving back to Kentucky, I was wanting to continue to be a meaningful contributor and partner in the conversation around the drug epidemic. And from my point of view, from my judgment and assessment, the best way to do that is in the Attorney General's office. And so that's ultimately why I threw my name in the hat on January 22nd.
What are the duties, the basic duties for the voters to understand of the both constitutional under Kentucky's Constitution and then statutorily?
Well, the Kentucky Constitution puts out that the Attorney General is the legal officer for Kentucky, but the authorizing statute, as you alluded to, is KRS 15. That's the chapter that authorizes the responsibility of the Attorney General's office. And as you can imagine, it says essentially that you are the legal officer of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and you have an interest and responsibility to protect and defend the determinations and judgments on policy that are made by the General Assembly. And that's the view that I take of the job. I take that very seriously, that once you do that oath, that you have a responsibility to enforce and uphold the laws of the General Assembly. Part and parcel to that is your responsibility as the chief law enforcement officer. And I think over the last few years that has been lost because of some of the decisions that have been made by our current Attorney General, Andy Beshear. I take the view in the assessment that the Attorney General's office should primarily be about the law enforcement matters that we have here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We lost 1,565 individuals to drug overdoses here in the Commonwealth based on the most recent numbers. I'm not satisfied by that number, and I don't think most Kentuckians are either. And I think we need someone in that office that has the relationships with Kentucky law enforcement that can reestablish the credibility of that office as the chief law enforcement officer, and that's ultimately why I got in this race.
Why do you think you're the best candidate in the Republican primary?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One, part of my relationship with Kentucky law enforcement when I was in McConnell's office was helping them find additional dollars, additional resources to help with their drug interdiction efforts. So I work closely with the Office of National Drug Control Policy in Washington, D.C., and the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program that we have here in Kentucky called Appalachia HIDA to help them find dollars to help with the drug interdiction efforts. In fact, Taylor County is a HIDA county. And so I've become very, very familiar with the responsibility and the relationships that you need in Washington, D.C. to bring in additional dollars. You know, I know there are limited dollars and limited funds in Frankfort to help with drug interdiction efforts. So I think I bring the skill set out of Washington, D.C. that will allow us not only to get funds here in Frankfort, but also to get funds from Washington, D.C. And having built those relationships with Kentucky leadership in law enforcement, I think uniquely positioned me to run that office effectively and again, reestablish the credibility of that office as the chief law enforcement officer. The other thing is I think it presents a unique opportunity for the Republican Party as we move out of the primary process and go into the general election. I think it'd be quite a striking contrast with the presumed Democratic nominee, Greg Stumbo. If I'm the candidate of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, I think I'd represent the party well on that front, and I think we have a strong opportunity to say on May 22nd, the day after the primary, that we are not going to concede a vote in the general election. And I think I'm the best candidate to be able to make that claim as we move out of this primary process.
If you're the nominee, what would be the primary issues in running against former Attorney General, former Speaker of the House, a name that's fairly well established and fairly well known across the Commonwealth?
Well, I think the primary issue will continue to be the public safety of the men, women, and children of all of 120 counties here in Kentucky. And the way that that has manifested itself here most recently is the drug epidemic. And I use the word drug epidemic because it's not only opioids any longer or heroin. It's now crystal meth that we're seeing a resurgence in because it's not being made by mom and pops in homes any longer. It's been brought in by drug traffickers and Mexican cartels, which is one of the reasons I've been so bullish on President Trump's decision to build a wall. That's why I'm so supportive of it, because I think even though some of the drugs are coming in through the ports of entry, there are also other wide open spaces on our border that allow these drug traffickers to bring this poison into states all across the country, and including the Commonwealth here. So I think that will continue to persist as the main issue as we move out of the primary and go into the general election. There will also be, other conversations that I think we'll be able to have as it relates to what is the responsibility of the Attorney General. Again, I take the position that you are to enforce and uphold the laws that are passed by the General Assembly. I think we've moved away from that with our current Attorney General, who's seen it as his responsibility to substitute his judgment for the collective judgment of the General Assembly and the governor. I take the view, again, that you're sent there as the Attorney General to enforce those laws that are coming out of the General Assembly.
With regard to the opioid problem, to what extent would you as Attorney General support going after the pharmaceutical companies? And of course, Attorney General Beshear has done that to some extent. Some would say he didn't do enough. Some would say he did too much. What would be your position as Attorney General with regard to that particular issue?
Well, I do think that that is an attractive and sort of shiny object that to go after, but what I want to make sure that we're focusing on as well, that I alluded to earlier, is the drug traffickers. And so that requires, in my judgment, that we work closely with our U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District, Rob Duncan, and our U.S. Attorney in the Western District, Russell Coleman. They've already got very active and robust prosecutions ongoing in that regard. In my view, for far too long, the communication between the U.S. attorneys in the Eastern District and the Western District and the Attorney General's office have been siloed. There's been a lack of communication. I want to make sure that we're working together and that there are synergies there to effectively confront this drug epidemic, so that we need to be going very, very, very strongly after the drug traffickers and letting them know that they're no longer welcome here in the Commonwealth.
You've touched on this already, but I would like to hear you articulate for the voters the top 3 issues for the office for your tenure that you would address, and to an extent what you would propose as Attorney General to address each of those issues.
Sure.
And I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
In a limited time.
Oh, fair enough. Well, you know, the 3 things that I think are the largest priorities are: 1, reestablishing the credibility of the office. 2 is expanding the footprint of the office, and then 3, what we've talked about, is the drug epidemic. I think on the first matter, reestablishing the credibility, I think that's just getting back to, you know, brass tacks, the bare bones of what the job entails, which is being the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but also upholding and enforcing the laws that are passed by the General Assembly. Politics has played too much of a role in the Attorney General's office. I think we need to depoliticize the office. I think regardless of what decisions that are made by the General Assembly, it's the task and the responsibility of the Attorney General to make sure those things are defended, whether it be relates to litigation or anything of that nature. So I think that's the responsibility that the Attorney General swears an oath to. The second thing is to expand the presence, and what I mean by that, currently there is an office of the Attorney General in Frankfort, Louisville, and then Prestonsburg. Prestonsburg, obviously, because General Snumbo was there at one point. But I think, you know, a lot of times what I hear as I've been traveling around the Commonwealth is that, particularly in the western part of our state, that they feel sometimes like stepchildren. So I want to make a very concerted effort and make it a priority that we have some sort of visual representation of the Attorney General's office in West Kentucky. That hasn't happened over a period of years. There's a hotline that you can call, but in my judgment, what is needed is either boots on the ground or some sort of structure that says to the folks of West Kentucky that this office is working for you in all 120 counties, just not Frankfort, Louisville, and Prestonsburg. And to the third point, on the drug epidemic front, I think, you know, within the Attorney General's office there is the Criminal Department of Investigations. I want to staff that department up. Right now in the Criminal Department of Investigations, in the drug unit, there are 8 drug investigators. I think we need 10 because right now they've got a very heavy caseload. I think if there's a Republican Attorney General, the General Assembly might be willing to give a few more dollars. Also, in addition to that, my relationships in Washington, D.C. might help us provide a little more funding for the office as well through some of the grants that are available through the federal government. But I think at the end of the day that we need more investigators if we're going to be serious to our commitment about stemming the tide of this drug epidemic. And so that's my commitment there as well.
Is there any benefit in terms of the investigators of designating that as the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation? I think that was tried once before. I know that's a title.
Right.
It's a matter of semantics, but does it capture any kind of attention, send a message?
Well, I don't know. I know the last time that was tried, it had some negative connotations with it during the Snumbo administration. It was
correct.
It was harmful to the Fletcher administration in many regards. So I'd probably want to stay away from that nomenclature if I could. But I do think that there needs to be a robust and renewed effort within the Criminal Department of Investigations as it relates to staffing there. Again, the principal charge, in my judgment, of the Attorney General's office is the public safety of men, women, and children of all 120 counties. And what that means to me is that we get a handle on this drug epidemic that we have on our hands, because I believe that we can do better than what we've been doing over the last few years.
With regard to the rampant drug problem, and I think we would all agree it's horrendous.
Yes, sir.
It has reached epidemic, even beyond the word epidemic. Perhaps as far as the victims, those that are using,
yes, sir,
the addicts, if you will, what would you do as AG in the context? You've mentioned the traffickers and the cartels, and obviously I think 90% of the people would agree with you on that.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to the addicts, what would you propose there in tandem with other agencies and organizations?
Of course. Well, one of the big things that I hope to do is really be a platform to promote what the Kentucky State Police are currently doing. Commissioner Sanders, in his time prior to being commissioner, had instituted what's essentially called the Angel Program, which is a program that allows users, not the traffickers,
Right.
not the folks that are peddling the poison, but the folks that really have an addiction issue, allows them to go to a police office or a KSP post and surrender essentially and say, look, I need help. Please help me. I'm surrendering all of my paraphernalia, and I want treatment. I want to encourage and promote that program. I really think that we need a holistic approach as it relates to stemming the tide of this drug epidemic, and that means enforcement, but that also means treatment and making sure that people have a means and an ability and a way to get to treatment. And that also requires that, from my view, that churches be involved in the process as well. My home church back in Elizabethtown, Grace Heartland Community Church, has done a really good job, I think, of trying to be engaged and active on the back end, when folks are re-entering into society, trying to stabilize them so they have jobs, so they're not recidivating, and so they don't feel it necessary to enter into a life of crime and to stay addicted to drugs.
Cyber crimes, increased frequency, seriousness in our state. What measures would you take as AG to help protect? I know there are already programs in place, but particularly to help our vulnerable populations.
Well, I think that's going to be a huge issue over the next decade. And in fact, this morning I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal. Amy Hess, who used to be the special agent in charge of the FBI in Louisville, is now heading up the cyber unit in Washington, D.C. I think as Kentucky under Governor Bevin continues to increase its economic activity and continues to increase and bring in these new companies, Kentucky is going to be a larger and larger target for cyber crimes. So we need to continue to have in the AG's office a very robust cyber crimes unit, one that is keeping up with the changing trends, and these cyber bullies, I call them, are very savvy, and so it's important that we have people that are just as fundamentally sound as it relates to cyber abilities online, and so I intend to make sure that we continue working diligently to make sure that our elder population is not being scammed in a particular way that comes across as someone trying to do something benevolent on their behalf, but ultimately it's a scam of some sort. So we're going to continue to work very diligently to make sure that sort of activity is not welcome in the Commonwealth too.
How would you describe your legal philosophy?
Sure.
I started to say judicial philosophy, but you're not running for a judicial position. But how would you define it?
Well, I take a very similar approach. My judicial philosophy and my legal philosophy are very similar in the fact that I believe that a judge and that an attorney general should be restrained in their approach as it relates to how active they are in the affairs of the General Assembly or pushing out their own views as it relates to statutory or constitutional interpretation. The Attorney General is there to uphold and enforce the laws and defend the laws that are passed by the General Assembly, not to substitute your judgment or preferences for those of the collective judgment of the General Assembly. I often tell people that you send your elected representatives to Frankfort to make the policy judgments. You don't send the Attorney General there to then substitute his judgment for those of the General Assembly. And that's the view that I take, is that you have to be willing to set aside your own political policy preferences for those that are passed if you swear an oath to take this job.
Are there conceivable circumstances where you would perhaps challenge the action of either a sitting governor or a General Assembly?
I think you obviously have to take each case,
Right.
case by case basis, and as those matters come to me and I'm asked to review and make determinations, I'll do that in an independent assessment. But my initial instinct is to take the charge in KRS 15 very seriously, that we are tasked with upholding the laws that are passed by the General Assembly.
Other issues that we've not addressed that come to mind that you would pursue or address as Attorney General?
Well, one of the things that I've been, as we've gone around on the campaign trail, people have often said, politics is playing a large part in the AG's office. What can we do to rebuff or stop that? And one of the things that I've talked about is establishing a Solicitor General's office in the Attorney General's. right now, based on the KRS, you're given a deputy attorney general, and then you're given 2 assistant attorney generals. I don't know if it's a change in nomenclature or what, but at the end of the day, I do think it is important symbolically to make sure that Kentucky knows that there will be somebody at the AG's office that will be standing up for the values and the judgments that are made by the General Assembly. And maybe, a lot of states, Republican AGs have made the decisions, and even Democratic AGs have made the decisions that a Solicitor General is an important role that needs to be in the Attorney General's office, especially as we move forward into this next decade.
Define that for some voters may not be familiar with that concept.
Right. Well,
define it a little more.
Yeah, essentially what it functions as the individual, he or she, who is tasked with defending the laws that are passed by the General Assembly, but not only defending the laws, also litigating cases on behalf of the Commonwealth. Say if there's some sort of civil fine issue that needs to be worked out, then the Solicitor General normally takes the lead in doing that. And so Kentucky has essentially that responsibility in the AG's office, but I really think, in terms of updating and reforming the office and making sure that it is consistent and matching the challenges of the time, it might be necessary for a reform of that office that demonstrates that we are keeping up and keeping pace with our other states as relates to establishing this office within the Attorney General's.
One obvious question that comes your way is that of relative youth.
Yes, sir.
And particularly if you're the nominee, really either you or Senator Schroeder, either one will face that question in a fall election with former AG Stembo. How do you respond to that question?
Well, I tell people all the time that I am young, but I've had some pretty significant life experiences, and was able to be the general counsel to the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, which was a unique opportunity. And I think whether it's been at large law firms here in Kentucky, whether it's been as general counsel to the senator, whether it be on the football field or as a law clerk, I've tried day in and day out to work very, very hard in each role. And I think people that know me would say that is the case. The other thing that I say, I think it's actually really, really good for the Republican Party that we have 2 relatively young individuals, in contrast to the Democratic Party that in many ways has demonstrated that it's a little bit tired in that there was not one individual that was willing to step up and run against Greg Stumbo in the primary process. We're the party of the future and the party of ideas, and as I've gone around the Commonwealth, not only am I seeing, older individuals, but younger individuals really taking an active interest in this electoral process. And that's encouraging to me, someone who is a young person, to see that there are other young folks that have conservative values, but not only conservative values, also are willing to be engaged in the political process. I think we need more of it, so I'm happy to be the torchbearer, if you will, for our party and for the young folks that are involving themselves in this process.
How do you respond to those that might say conservatives in particular have a reputation for vitriol and negativity and harshness in today's public domain? Right.
Well, I think the best counter to that is just to run the campaign that we've been running, and the one to run the campaign that other folks within this Republican primary process, from the governor's race all the way down, have been running, which is to talk about ideas, talk about your experiences, talk about what you intend to bring to the office and what challenges you hope to confront over the next decade. And so that's, in my judgment, the best way to counter whatever perceived notions there are that there's a lot of vitriol within this party. I don't see it. I hope that people, when they see me, don't see it either. So.
To what extent does your Christian faith inform your public persona and your position on issues?
It very, very, very heavily informs all the decisions in my life, whether they be personal or public. My relationship with Christ is more important to me than anything in the world. He's the leader of my heart, and every day I try to run a campaign. To your question about how do you run essentially a positive campaign?
Right.
Well, I try to run a positive campaign because that is how Christ compels me. And it's to try to be intentional in relationships and the folks that I meet every day, to honor Him and to be that shining city on the hill, as is so often spoke about as a disciple of Christ.
Less than a minute to
Yes,
speak to the voters.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Daniel Cameron. I am running for Attorney General in the May 21 primary. I certainly ask for your vote. I ask for it because in my judgment, this is the critical office. And I think over the last few years, the current Attorney General has abdicated his responsibility as it relates to the drug epidemic that we have here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I think that the next Attorney General must focus primarily on the responsibility of the drug epidemic and challenging and confronting it over the next few years. So I appreciate being here today. I welcome your support and your consideration on May 21. And again, my name is Daniel Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yes, sir. Thank
This
you.
is John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues with Daniel Cameron, Republican candidate for Attorney General of Kentucky in the May 21st primary. And again, we encourage all of our viewers and audience to study the candidates and vote on May 21st. Thank you.